It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 16th edition of School of Tomorrow events, Guardians of the Future, Shaping Tomorrow with Generative AI. The nonprofit SOT event series was launched by Beacon House in 2000 to engage global communities in conversations that shape the future of schools and societies. I would like to thank Google for Education and their partner, TechBelly, the lead sponsor for SOT 2023, and the titanium sponsor UBL. I would also like to thank My Backpack, MK Books, Allied Bank Limited, Habib Bank Limited, Wateen, and Interwood. We also thank our SOT supporters, including Paramount Books and Pure Life, Nestle Pure Life, who have contributed to this year's event. My name is Sadia Chand, and I am branch head at Beacon House F74. Kindly note these important points. Please ensure your cell phones are silent. In case of emergency, the exit is at the back. Please use the SOT app to scan the QR code for Q&A and feedbacks. Share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag Guardians of the Future and hashtag SOT 2023. If you need assistance, our ushers are here. For questions, please either use the flashcards provided by the ushers or the mobile app. The panel discussion will last for about 45 minutes, followed by the Q&As. Now I would like to introduce the moderator of this session, Mr. Asfandyar Kasuri. He's a tech entrepreneur and a development sector specialist who is committed to using technology to create social impact in Pakistan. He's the executive director of New Globe, the world's leading organization which supports visionary governments in leveraging technology to digitally transform their public education systems. He is also a leading advocate for legal tech-based reforms in Pakistan and is working towards creating a digital legal marketplace which aims to transform the way in which Pakistani citizens access justice. Prior to this, Mr. Kasuri has served as a program director of the Imran Khan Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing humanitarian assistance to post-disaster environments. Mr. Asfandyar Kasuri, you are requested to please come up on the stage.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. That was a rather wonderful introduction. I was hoping to truncate the introductions of the panelists on stage, but maybe I have to truncate them a little bit less. This gentleman needs very little introduction. Dr. Moeed Yusuf has served as a national security advisor. He has served with think tanks in the West, including the US Institute of Peace. And most recently, he has joined the Beacon House family as the Vice Chancellor of Beacon House National University. We welcome you, sir. To his left, another one of our great luminaries in Pakistan, Mr. Maruf Ali Sayyed is the CEO of SERP. He's a data scientist, data analyst, and an economist, and we've already had some wonderful, stimulating discussion on the subject we'll be speaking on tonight. And all the way at the end, also needs very little introduction, Memel Sarfraz, co-founder and of The Current, renowned journalist, host of the Aurat Card, which I have seen, and of course the show on Geo, Report Card. Thank you for joining us. And I believe joining us online, Amanda Munoz de Toro. I hope, Amanda, I've pronounced your name correctly. She works in humanitarian assistance and legal aid. She is the executive director of Phoenix, a humanitarian legal aid organization, which is empowering holistic legal protection and mental health services to vulnerable asylum seekers crossing the sea from Turkey to Greece, and has just finished her deployment as Oxfam's country lead for the Ukraine response in Romania and Moldova. Thank you for joining us. We'll try to keep the conversation free-flowing. I know as of recent, we all know or pay attention to the news. As of recent, polarization in the world seems to be on everyone's minds. There's a feeling of anger, of helplessness, despair, and just plain old frustration about not knowing how to get past the impasses that exist today and have for a while. 1989 for me personally was the year of hope. It was when the Great Wall, though not the Great Wall, the Berlin Wall, the Berlin Wall came down, and Francis Fukuyama said it is the end of history, and that the neoliberal democracies of the world had triumphed over the Russian bloc, and now this was all going to usher in a new era of economic prosperity in the form of globalization, as it was known back in the past. It was a positive tinge to it, no longer, I believe. And then very shortly after 1989, just a decade later, September 11, 2001, and a new era of imperial domination, which to some of us, and we'll discuss this here today, may seem a little bit like a repeat of a playbook that we've witnessed throughout history, at least since 1945 and beyond. And so we'll open the discussion now with Muid, and I'll ask you, with regards to polarization itself, polarization and conflict, is the shape of this different in the 21st century than it has been in the past?
Thank you. First of all, first of all, thank you to the organizers for having me. So, Sundar, I think no. In some ways, conflict is human nature. Violent conflict is also part of human nature, and we've seen this throughout history. The big difference, I think, in this century, and perhaps part of the last century, of course, is the advent of technology and the ability to scale up things instantly. Your ability to know of what is happening, to internalize and change policies based on that. So the aura of things going wrong or right, I think it's you can't escape it anymore. That, I think, is a big difference between now and perhaps the prior to the most recent information and technology revolution. But in terms of the fundamentals of international relations in the world and how it operates, i.e. state interests dominate everything else, I think there's no difference. When we are on the wrong side of that equation, everything looks like it's going to hell. When you are the perpetrator, you think that this is exactly how things will be resolved. And that, again, I don't think that fundamental quality is different. I think where you find us today is not a normal moment in global politics. And I say that for two reasons. One, there was a unipolar moment that came with Fukuyama wrongly saying that it's the end of history. That moment is gone. It's over. Whether we end up with a bipolar or a multipolar world, we'll find out. But these transitions are always messy. And you are seeing that both US, China, and Russia, in another corner, are unable to figure out what that equilibrium looks like, right? And you are going to see violent conflict for some period before this new equilibrium comes up. But the other problem is what worries me most. And this Israel-Palestine bit, I think, is the latest exposition, which is that you are approaching, in my view, a League of Nations moment. The collective governance of the world, which was always amorphous, it was always critiqued, but there was a collective wisdom that came from the organizations of the UN. What we are seeing happen to the United Nations today, I think, is a game changer. I don't think you will see the United Nations being what it has been, good or bad, in the past 70, 80 years going forward. That, I think, will now unravel a lot of the things that this collective wisdom held together, but we never really gave it credit for. If you look at the world in the last 80 years, 90 years, what you will find, whether you like it or not, post-World War II, is one, poverty levels globally have gone down drastically. So have gone down overall in terms of, and actually Maruf can talk to this. That doesn't mean everybody is doing better. Inequality has grown, all of that is. But I think as a model, there have been collective decisions that have prevented more genocides, more conflict, more trouble. There, I think we are now beginning to unravel. If that happens, you're going to end up with 1, 2, or 3 sheriffs in town. You've got to pick a camp, and everybody's going to be part of a particular camp. That really does worry me.
Okay, wow, well, I mean, a world without the UN. So if potentially what you're saying to us here is that the polarization is now so great, and the interests driving it are so vested in whatever it is that they desire, that any idea of a global village, or, I mean, the UN is not perfect, and the UN has not been able to help solve many crises.
Yeah.
But it's all we had.
Yeah.
And so that paints a rather difficult picture. Amanda, are you there? I can see you now, I think.
Yes, good. Thank you. There were some
I can't hear you though.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I think I can hear you now. Amanda, welcome to the School of Tomorrow conference. This might be a bit challenging for us. You're a bit far, and I'm not sure we can see your video quite as fluidly as we would like. Muid just spoke to the idea of increased polarization. How do you feel about that, given your work, your humanitarian work with asylum seekers and with people that are the victims of the Ukrainian conflict, for instance? Why don't you share your perspective on this new polarized world we live in?
Yes, I would agree with what the colleague said before. There is an increased polarization, and that is caused by technology and an increase in different conflicts around the world, and increase also in displacement. I would also say that besides the fact there's more polarization, there's also more connection. So technology is working both ways. On the one hand, it is connecting us, and what connects us makes the other less scary, and hopefully that will continue to improve in the next years. But at the same time, technology is also allowing for different information to spread that does increase on polarization. In the Ukraine response, we did see the world quite aligned on the response to support Ukrainian refugees, but again, we see that with what is happening with Palestine, the world is not aligned towards refugees, actually depending on who the refugees are and who people that are affected are. So that really reflects that the world is still polarized, even when it has to do with violence and conflict and people suffering.
Okay, well, it's the audio is a bit challenging, but I did catch the message that had to do with technology and the spreading of awareness and information through technology. Memal, you have a web-based content platform. News is definitely part of it. How do you feel about how we can use digital technology and even AI to help forge a more peaceful world? And because you are actually our resident expert on Pakistan, let's localize the discussion on polarization a little bit as well. I feel, and I think most of the people here will agree, that polarization in the politics of Pakistan is unparalleled in history. So just a bit of commentary on all these things, and then I know you wanted to say something about Israel and Palestine as well.
Thank you, Asandhya. So the thing is that, I mean, when we talk about the polarization in Pakistan, especially the political polarization in Pakistan, it didn't happen overnight. It took more than a decade, and actually technology in many ways was used for it, be it mainstream media, or television channels, or social media, the use of social media to amplify attacks, online trolling of journalists or critics or political rivals. So of course technology did play a huge part in this political polarization, but the thing is that the decision was taken elsewhere, and today there are repercussions for actually talking about where those decisions were taken. But we know there are powerful quarters in Pakistan that take the decisions, but then we saw that this polarization, the reason was that, the judicial establishment, we talk about the military establishment all the time, and we know their role in politics and everything else, but we don't really talk about the role of the judicial establishment and how it was used to facilitate this polarization in society, how it was used to take political decisions, wrong decisions. That has led to this. And then, of course, I think that it will now take years. It is actually very, I sound very frustrated or, very unhappy with this, but that's the truth, that it will take years now, maybe decades, to actually end this polarization, because the thing is that, we have a huge youth bulge. And it took years for them to be fed things online or through the media. Or right now, it's actually very disconcerting for somebody like me, because we really can't have logical arguments with each other without resorting to personal attacks. This is happening in our families, this is happening in our friends groups, this is happening with people online or with our colleagues. So this is something very dangerous, this set of polarization in Pakistan. For me, I'm a very idealistic person. I actually am very hopeful and optimistic about many things. But at the moment, I think that it will take many years to roll back this polarization and bring back some semblance of civility in our discourse. As for technology's role, I would certainly like to talk about that, because the thing is that, technology, while it has its cons, but it has a lot of plus points. And digital media has helped bring a lot of voices to the forefront that you really cannot, that were not there before, because, we have seen how especially when it comes to Israel and Palestine conflict, we've seen that the Western media, I'm not going to talk about the governments at the moment, we'll talk about that later, but the Western media has been complicit in what's going on in Palestine at the moment. We have right now seen that, the genocide that is taking place, it is being televised live on our television.
I'm sorry, that's an anti-Semitic comment. Just joking.
Yes, that's from the Western media.
I'm joking.
He was just being sarcastic. Because I'm talking about the Western media, so he's being sarcastic about that. So the thing is that, a genocide is being... No, that's what I'm saying, that, social media and technology has actually helped amplify these voices. Nobody can now deny what's going on in Palestine, what's going on with innocent Palestinians. And that's why we've seen that even the Western governments now are talking about humanitarian aid, allowing humanitarian aid after Israel has wiped off hospitals and schools and people, more than 9,000 or more than those deaths. So the thing is that the horrors are being played out on our television screens because of social media. It's the Palestinian journalists. I would really like to pay a tribute to the Palestinian journalists. More than 30 have so far died. They've been targeted by the Israelis. So the thing is that, they're very brave. There are a lot of voices on Instagram, on Twitter, on our Facebooks who bring us live situation, what's going on in Palestine, despite a blackout. So I do think that the social media has played a very good role, even in the Pakistani context. PTM, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, we were really not allowed to discuss the PTM on our television screens, but it was the social media in Pakistan that actually brought out a lot of truths of what happened to the Pashtuns, what's been happening to them. Even with the Afghan refugee crisis right now, a lot of voices a lot of truth has come out because of social media, and maybe mainstream media is not discussing these things as much as we should, because we know there's censorship, there's that. So social media helps with the censorship in a way. It brings out those voices that otherwise we wouldn't really hear of. And especially in the context of Palestine and Israel, that, the Western government's hypocrisy when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, or when it comes to other things. But it's all about self-interest, and that's what the West has done. And I think that the polarization now is very obvious, even globally, that way. And the Western governments may be doing whatever they want to do because of their self-interest, but their people are out on the streets protesting for the rights of the Palestinians. So there's that difference as well. I think social media has amplified their voices, and I'm glad that there are Palestinian voices on social media constantly talking about the hypocrisy of the West, of the Western government, or of a genocide being committed by an apartheid state.
Okay, fair enough. So I'll just, before I come to you, Maruf Saab, I'll come back to Moeed as a follow-up on what she said. So Memel touched upon this idea that, that the polarization is obviously at its heights. How do those who govern us in Pakistan, through your experience, of course, your understanding of it, fuel this kind of polarization, or not even governments, the institutions in general? Memel suggested that there's the judiciary may be involved, and that the different factions of power in Pakistan may be involved. Many people on the street believe that these things have to do with what one's religion is, or what the color of their skin is. Someone is Shia, someone is Sunni, someone is from Balochistan, you know, and so it goes in the world. How can we better recognize what the fundamental causes are? It feels to me sometimes, and maybe to others here as well, that issues are exploited to create the division and the polarization that we experience in Pakistan and the world today. Please comment.
So, I don't know.
Okay.
I honestly don't know. It's a very complicated analytical puzzle, which the world is struggling to figure out. So, why do I say this? There's a time when you used to talk about people are swayed by political opinions, by governments, by states, and the cop-out answer was lack of education. There's lack of education, people, you know, are split, and the most educated societies in the world today are as polarized as we are, right? So there's something global about polarized politics across the board, from America to Japan. So that can't be. That could be one of the factors, but can't be the. Then I think the world has stumbled upon a deeper question, which is a very, very difficult one, but I think we should take it head on. Is polarization a problem? So even the questions you're asking, and rightly so, I think the starting point is an acceptance that polarization is bad and a problem, and thus let's figure out why it's happening. As somebody who believes in disruptive change to move away from the status quo, one view could be, and I'm not justifying or not, but one view could be that you almost inevitably have to break elite interests, shake up the system, go after the status quo to bring out something new. That new could be good or bad, right? In the olden times, you used to call it revolutions, and that's kind of disappeared because of the world we live in. But there have been manual revolutions, which is fighting for something. There have been technological revolutions in today's world, right? I mean, Ukraine, the Orange Revolution, a very good example of a mix. So I think we've got to first figure out what the goal is. Because one of the arguments I've struggled with, and Memel and I debate this offline all the time, if everybody agrees that one of the big problems in Pakistan is elite capture, whatever you define it as, political or economic or social, then is there any possible rational way that you would convince the elite to voluntarily pull back and allow space for others? If the answer is no, then you're going to shake up the system. When you shake up the system, you're going to polarize because you're going to pull people towards you, and that's very bad for society as well. So we are actually seeing that play out, but this is not a Pakistan problem. This is a global problem right now. The most educated and the completely uneducated are having the same political conversations. So I'm not quite sure what the answer is. What I do know is that this is not about just education or just good people or civilized or uncivilized or whatever it may be.
Maruf Saab, Moeed spoke of elite capture for the first time today. And as an economist and a data scientist and data analyst that you are, I ask you the question. I see a lot of commonality in the conflicts and the reasons that they happen, etc. From an economic interest perspective, are there men behind the curtains that are pulling the strings and bringing us to this polarized state? And perhaps what Mohit said, is the polarization actually the step on the way to the shake-up and the reform of a system? I remember Zizek, he said recently, leftist political philosopher, he said, socialism in the 21st century is about overcoming capitalism. He refused to get into details about what a neo-socialist order would be. But certainly there is inequality in the world. And to what extent do you think that is driving this politics of hate and polarization?
Sure, and thank you. I think this is a great conference, and hearing a lot of different perspectives. So thank you for having me. Let us unpack a little bit, because I think when we talk about, there are certainly frameworks around elite bargaining as well. So yes, there are systems, and our system is not the first one that has had elite capture, but there is actually a framework through which you can attempt elite bargaining. But let me first talk about this. We talked about, in aggregate terms, we have actually reduced poverty, and that is a fact. Globally, and of course, largely China moved hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But that poverty reduction did not happen across the board, right? So there's massive income inequality, and you spoke about this fact that in developed economies you see the same polarization happen. So there must be a deeper reason for that polarization to occur. So income inequality, and when you deny people their rights, their agency, then it has a lot of reverberations, right? So I'll give you an example. In Pennsylvania, there are counties that have only voted for Republicans twice, right? These are Democratic counties. And once was for Nixon, and the other was for Trump. Now why, right? We talked about globalization, loss of income, loss of jobs, massive income inequalities in developed countries, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and so on. That has a vicious cycle towards further fueling the political polarization, right? And then you throw in this fire, a massive fuel of technology, right? And technology has not just, we've talked a lot about social media and so on, but technology at large has huge displacement effects, right? Because it disrupts the structures that exist, and it says, okay, there are going to be winners and losers, and it chooses a new set of winners and losers, right? So that displacement, who pays for that? Who assures that some retraining of labor will occur, right? But then ultimately that income inequality hits people, and it brings out the worst in us, right? So it can be a virtuous cycle, but it can be a massive vicious cycle. But what I'll pose to you and the panel as well is, I think there's a bigger layer around it, which is that we live in the age of spin. You probably remember, and I'll switch between Urdu and English, but you remember purane zamane mein political leaders hote the, and they disagreed with one another, but they also respected one another, right? Now, why did that happen? If you see, I think social media has democratized information, but it has also shrunk spaces, private spaces, where you're not always on the screen. You're not always in front of the camera. You're not always saying what you need to say to show your loyalty towards political party and so on. So ultimately, I think that shrinking of private spaces where you could find that common ground, where you could actually agree to certain frameworks for the common good has completely disappeared. And the age of spin is such that, yes, I mean, I think we see on social media certain videos but that's all curated content. So it's not like if seeing children die in Gaza, which is an immense humanitarian crisis, should have moved Biden, should have moved political actors in certain countries. It didn't, because the information is now curated. The same set of information is not going to all actors. So we have all our silos, and those silos are getting even deeper. Ultimately, I think it comes down to economic incentives for a lot of this, where Israel, for example, it's yes, there's a lot of bombing and so on, but there are deeper layers. They control trade in and out of Palestinian regions. They control, there's massive loss of revenue, no taxation that can go into, development funds for Palestinians, whether it's education, infrastructure, and so on. And then, of course, let's not forget, in this age of spin and polarization, we seem to think that this is a religious war. It's not. It's simply an extrajudicial displacement of people. And that's a very big contradiction for Israel, because it was created as a symbol for human suffering, but the price is paid for by those who had no party to guilt, right? I mean, they're innocent of guilt. So anyway, I'll stop there and come back on technology.
So it's kind of all doom and gloom, really, from this panel. Obviously, there are things that one could hope for. I mean, just talking on Palestine and Israel, I was quite surprised at the speed with which the anti-Israel protests began. I mean, it was one day of pro-Israeli protest in America, and then from day two onwards, it's just a whole bunch of protest against Israel in reality out in the world, and on the television, it's a whole bunch of, history started on the 7th of October, 2023. Those Hamas, those Hamas, those Hamas. And obviously we all know that Hamas was not just created in some kind of cocoon. It was as a result of many, many years of occupation of a people. And so this polarization, which might also be something that gets us to a fight and to a shakeup, it also leads to Hamas and the TTP and all other nature of violent outfits. Of course, the biggest sponsor of terror in this case is Israel, and the terror it perpetuates there. But in pursuit of peace, what ideas do our panelists have? And before you guys can think about that for a moment, do we still have Amanda with us? Is Amanda online?
Yes.
Yeah? Amanda, you heard all of us here in Pakistan on the panel talk about polarization, the politics of hate, and what possibilities there may be for the future. Why don't you share your perspective on these pressing issues of the day? Polarization and hate. A European perspective would be very welcome here.
Sure. Please let me know if you can hear me okay. Can you hear me, or is it not good connection?
This is better than last time.
Okay, I'm going to turn off my camera to try to see if it's better. I would have to agree with everything that has been said until now. Capitalism has brought with it one of the biggest dangers of our times, which is expanding corporatocracy, and that interests are heavily influenced by corporations. They're influencing the national and international agenda, and inevitably peace. International technology like electric cars are causing the ever-growing need for lithium. And as we know, lithium is sourced in countries that have always been used and abused, like Afghanistan, Congo. We have the same situation with coltan for phones and for laptops, which is driving the displacement of millions of Congolese people and the death of 20 million since the 90s. The number of examples is endless, and they're not inspiring numbers or numbers that give us hope. But it's true that whereas technology can be used to raise voices and share information about what's happening on the ground, as was rightly mentioned on Palestine. Technology has also been the source of a lot of suffering in countries and a lot of displacement. And this cannot be done without the dehumanization of certain populations, the overload of information that comes with technology, and the tendency that we have of population towards self-interest and comfort. So you were speaking a little bit about what can be done, what's the hope, and I think it all comes down to human nature and our intentions. We need to be willing to sacrifice part of our comforts to reduce human suffering. And technology needs to be deeply rooted in our good intentions to reduce this suffering. And I think with the Palestine example, we are seeing a lot of people engaged in boycotting, in civil disobedience, in protests, and that is a very important step. And I would say a second step would be that until now, peace has been about maintaining the status quo. It has never been about recognizing past mistakes, about having justice, freedom, equality, and the economic opportunities that were discussed before by the panel. And that's the direction in which we have to go towards. And I hope you could hear a little bit at least. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think there's general agreement that we have to figure out how to achieve a more just world, a world in which there is less inequality. It's interesting, that point, less poverty, but still disharmony. And so income inequality, or just inequality in general, seems to be a problem of itself that doesn't necessarily have to do with not having a roof on your head or food to eat. It rings true in America. Most of these men who run around with the guns and shoot up a school or a grocery store, they're always these lone gunmen with mental issues, and yet there are guns. And you could just take away the guns, but we can't take away the guns. And so there will just forever and ever into the near future and beyond, people will be worried that their child will go to school one day and be at a school where somebody just comes and shoots up the school, fueling even more hatred. Yes, go ahead.
So I think, this income inequality and is really deeply rooted with your sense of self as well, right? Your sense of identity and agency at the end of the day. So I think what it does when you lose income inequality and you see that the system is really, benefiting, it's almost rigged, right? जब आपको elite capture दिखता है, and when you see all that, this disillusions you. I think in our case as well, you see it. I mean, we're talking about Palestine and Israel, but look, in Pakistan, where, there's, I think you've gone from perhaps misplaced exuberance to a complete disillusionment. And you have, in this country, graduates are 31% unemployment, right? So income inequality has a lot of, I think it really ruptures the social contract of a citizen with its state. And that disillusionment and that frustration has to come out in some ways.
Although, can I just, I think it's a combination of factors, but Trump's rich white urban voter is not voting because of inequality at all.
Women, actually. And then also rights because taxation, right?
Taxation, maybe. But the point is, there is also the elite that first rigs the system,
yes,
then associates with the non-elite and their deprivation. So in terrorism studies, which is something I've looked at very closely, most of the people who are planning, thinking, and egging on are not poor.
Mm-hmm.
It's the foot soldier who blows himself up and you say, oh, poverty. It's actually not poverty at all.
Yeah.
These are very privileged people who are associating with the misery of the underprivileged while holding on to the status quo that keeps them privileged.
Yeah, a classic example is Trump, right? A billionaire.
Yeah, but
trying to,
even his voters, if you go to DC and talk to the rich white voter who's voting, they're actually not thinking that deeply.
mm-hmm.
They're thinking of exactly somebody coming in and breaking the Washington consensus, which is the consensus that they have preyed on. So there is, it's almost paradoxical.
And it's to your point, Fandi, that, almost polarization as an instrument of breaking people and using them for political gain.
So we'll start with, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, when we talk of technology, because I couldn't mention it before, but TikTok, I think, is a very, very revolutionary platform in many ways. It has broken class barriers. And also, even in the Israel-Palestine war right now, the Western press is saying, why is TikTok so pro-Palestine? And then they're blaming China because it's a Chinese technology, so that's a platform. So they're actually blaming China for that. But the truth is that, even in Pakistan, we have Instagram. You need to be, educated to use it, literate enough to use it, or Twitter or Facebook. But Instagram is something that, everybody can use it. As long as you have a smartphone in your hand, you make videos. I actually think that people are more politically aware on TikTok. And they can actually voice their opinions. And ask anybody in this room how many people have TikTok. Gen Z is using it a lot. And also people who are domestic helpers and other people, they are actually using it. If you ask your driver or somebody, your guard or somebody, they'll have TikTok. And I think it's amazing. So TikTok is also helping change opinions. It's a disruptor of sorts. And it's challenging mainstream media, but we're being taught and there's no censorship on TikTok either. So there's that. I think it's very important that, technology and these things will eventually, you were talking about peace earlier. The thing is that, it's a very idealistic thing to say that, yes, there will be peace, but it will take time. But I do think that technology will eventually help bring the truth forward and also change things and maybe make governments realize that they need to change their policies.
On that note, quick fire question to every panelist. In pursuit of peace, if you were the chief administrator or chief of whatever, prime minister, what would you do what decisions or steps would you take to bring about a more peaceful Pakistan? And for Amanda, it would be a more peaceful world, but we're in Pakistan.
Mohit was NSA, he should answer first.
I have a one-line answer. Implement the national security policy that this state agreed to, which essentially says, you want to be peaceful, start and end with economic security, and everything else will flow from that.
We have a lot of great policy in Pakistan. Somehow it just has a habit of not getting implemented.
But it's not trivial that the state apparatus, the same state apparatus would come together, agree on a formal document and make it public that this is where we want to go. It's a start, but I think that's how it has to happen.
Fair enough. Maruf Saab.
I agree. Economic security is at the base, but I think the way I will say it is, I think we have to invest in people. It starts with people. Human capital formation is the bedrock of economic security, right?
For me,
but what about the young person on Twitter who just is really pissed off and just wants to use everyone that they come across?
No, I think, you have to respect the mandate of the people. If you don't allow that to happen, if you try to control it through a hybrid model or a hybrid plus model, things will unravel really fast, and that's not good for this country. So actually, I think the ruling elite should realize that the people's mandate should be respected, no matter what the choice is.
Fair enough. Amanda, what would you do to make the world a peaceful place if you were, say, heading the EU right now?
Well, a bit what I was saying before about justice and recognition of past mistakes. So we need to recognize we just don't want to keep peace just by maintaining the status quo, recognition of what has been done wrong, economic opportunities and equality, and basic rights. We need to be able to respect people's basic rights and treat everyone like equal citizens without a second category of citizens, which is what's happening in Europe right now with asylum seekers and refugees and people of color.
Excellent. We hope our friends in Europe take a more impartial view going forward on things happening in the world. To the Q&A section, I have a whole bunch of questions. We have 10 minutes for the Q&A. Whoever wants to answer, I suppose we'll just raise your hand and let us know. Question number one. Since populists derive power from polarization, can you appreciate that a toxic relationship between populists and the militaries exists, particularly in the case of US and Pakistan? This is for you, Mohit, actually.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't think there's any similarity between the US and Pakistan when it... Ji. Bataएं, क्या question? I think you can't compare the two. The rise of a populist does not have to be on the back of an institution or institutions. That can simply happen because people want a populist, right? So I think whether the populist comes in at the end of the day and gets into tension with an institution is a function of the country, not of the phenomena of populism. And in Pakistan, it plays out very differently. In the US, it plays out very differently. The other thing, please keep in mind, is that every time we discuss these things, at the back of our mind is an individual, an episode, an institution, etc. The way I look at things is, there's a phenomena which is an experiment in its own. Pakistan has gone through multiple cycles. The US has gone through multiple cycles. We don't know what the equilibrium is. That's why we keep falling into this trap. I don't think we still know where we want to end up in terms of this equilibrium of institutions versus society. What we do know is that our social contract is very weak and it's not getting stronger. That's the real worry. Whether a populist comes or a anti-populist comes, I think is irrelevant. I mean, Mehmet is right. People will decide who they want, but the social contract, the trust in the state, if you don't have that, even the right decisions in the state, people will not appreciate.
Question number two, the rise of a new war in the Middle East and Russia challenging the unipolarization or the unipolar status of the US towards becoming a multipolar world statement. Can we achieve peace in a multipolar world? Will it be better? Was it better in the Cold War for countries like us than it is now? I guess it's a good question. Can peace be achieved in a multipolar world?
So the Human Rights Watch actually released a statement on October 3rd about Palestine and Israel, and it was titled "Unprecedented Repression Demands Unprecedented Response," and it was about the oppression by Israel and Palestine. And they said that actually changing things will require a different approach, one rooted in human rights, international law, and recognition of the reality on the ground. So I do think that this is something very important. I mean, we talk about self-interest. I mean, when the Western world talks about human rights, or when they talk about Ukraine, it's based on their self-interest, right? But it's not really about human rights being violated in Palestine. Maybe it's also, there's a certain part of racism also, in a way that, the skin, your color of the skin, there's that as well. But at the end of the day, the Western world should not be telling us what human rights are. We should also be making a decision about that. I mean, what's going on in Palestine is all about human rights, but is the Western world talking about it? No, they're not. And this is not rooted in international law either. I mean, Israel is openly committing war crimes, but are they going to be tried for it? Is something that, all of us as a collective have to be asking for. And unfortunately, the problem is that, when we talk, even in occupied Kashmir, when we talk about Kashmir, there's this myth of the Muslim Ummah. There's no Muslim Ummah. The Muslim countries are not united. They are also about self-preservation, about their relationship with India, about the Indian market. So they don't talk about Kashmir. They don't talk about the repression, the oppression in Kashmir or the occupation. They've been forced to talk about Palestine now, and that is because of social media, honestly speaking. I mean, Al Jazeera is maybe the only TV channel that is actually reporting facts on the ground. The others are not really. So there's that. I think at the end of the day, we have to, as people, we have to raise our voice collectively and not let the West dictate what human rights are or what international laws are. We have to raise our voice.
And so, on a multipolar world,
Sure. I think we have to also change our expectation. I think we expect that this world somehow works on justice. It doesn't. I mean, that's the honest truth. It actually is a lot more about power. And in a unipolar world or a multipolar world, you talked about the Cold War, I think some of the seeds of our disintegration happened during the Cold War. Our democratic institutions were marginalized, right? And it didn't happen just in, countries like Pakistan. Pinochet got a lot of support from the US in Chile, right? So what about human rights and justice? You have many countries who are not signatories of the International Court of Justice. So, war crimes have happened, but we have not been able to bring certain people to justice. And it has to do a lot with which countries they belong to or the color of their skin and which side of the globe they're on. But ultimately, I think in a multipolar or unipolar world, one thing is for sure, we have to protect our interests. Whether it's a unipolar world or a multipolar world, they are going to act based on their incentives, their interests. It is incumbent on us to understand what our interests are, which kind of speaks to state capability and competence. Second, how to realize those interests in a way that protects us and lets us define our future and our identity.
Excellent. Would we do better in a multipolar? Are we like from Pakistan's perspective? The world might be multipolar. We have two big brothers, one in the east, one in the west. We get to choose or no.
I hope the day doesn't come when we have to choose.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll be in serious trouble. But can I make a completely wild, obnoxious comment?
Please.
Thank you. It's on you. Hypocrisy that is being discussed is actually a good thing. Because hypocrisy of human rights says that the collective wisdom has agreed to certain ideals that can be talked about and benchmarked against. And then every country in different degrees is violating that ideal benchmark.
Sure.
Fear the day when you don't have the benchmark. When the collective wisdom disappears, or the collective governance model disappears, and you do not have the international law regime in place, you won't have a discussion about hypocrisy because everybody can do what they want. And my worry where I started from is that the world is unraveling in a way, the collective governance, that you may not agree on the very basic principles of quote-unquote humanity or human rights, which are Western, but they give you a benchmark that you can then critique the West and the East, saying you're not fulfilling those benchmarks. The benchmarks are always ideal, but keep the hypocrisy intact, because otherwise you're going to end up with nothing. Now, of course, it's different for Palestine, different for something else.
But who's going to make them answerable for this? That was my thing. I'm not saying that
Okay.
there should not
That's
be
okay.
any international
But I
human rights
really
law.
fear the world in which you don't have that benchmark. We'll be in
No,
serious
I read out HRW statement because
So-
it said that you have to actually have human rights. You have to work within those frameworks of international human rights.
All I'm saying is, in creating new definitions of human rights, don't lose the one we have, however bad it may be, because we are going to struggle. That's all. On this unipolar, whatever you had said, too much pessimism, so let me just say one thing. When global environments are fluid and moving from one paradigm to another, international relations theory tells you that there are going to be new winners and losers. And Pakistan has a real opportunity to be a winner if we can proactively figure out how we should place ourselves given what is going to come in the future. That gets to state capacity and all of those things. But I think we have a real opportunity to work with both the US and China and benefit rather than picking a camp.
Excellent. On that note, thank you, panel. Thank you, Amanda, Memel, Maruf Saab, Moeed. It was a wonderful discussion. We are no closer to solving world peace, but definitely food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you.